Welcome back to Blacklit Memory. Tonight, I'm sharing 8 new stories from deep within the Appalachian Mountains, quiet warnings left behind by those who vanished without a trace. A grave with no name. A bell that rings from beneath the earth. A trail that leads you somewhere you've already been. Ever seen your own shadow walk ahead of you? Or heard your name whispered from the trees when no one else is there? If you find comfort in the strange and the sacred, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this with someone who still leaves a porch light on. Now, hush the world. And now, we step where others vanished. It was late October, just past dusk, when I saw the cat. I'd been following a dry stream bed off the Blue Ridge, hoping the journal entries weren't just mountain ramblings. My name's Amelia Price. I'm 29, a folklore anthropologist out of Asheville. And I've spent the last 5 years documenting burial rituals and vanished cemeteries across the Appalachian interior. This one had no name, just a set of fragmented references from 2 handwritten journals, describing a place where the roots tangle like hands, and where the earth breathes when no one's looking. I thought I was chasing a metaphor. Then the cat appeared, a black one, silent, lean, with coarse fur that didn't shine. Its eyes caught the last thread of fading light and held it like coals. It didn't meow, didn't blink, just turned from me and started walking deeper into the trees. I hesitated for maybe 3 seconds before following it off trail and down a slope I hadn't noticed until that moment. Even though I'd passed this ridge twice that week, the temperature dropped as the forest grew tighter. After maybe 20 minutes of silent walking, the trees gave way to a low hollow where the moss ran thick and undisturbed. That's when I saw them 9 shallow depressions in the ground, spaced irregularly but deliberate in their layout. The dips looked like old graves, but without any stones, no markers, no sign of history, just bare, soft earth. The air grew dense with silence, and every instinct I had told me the soil hadn't settled from time. It had been stirred recently. The cat sat at the edge of the nearest dip, tail curled neatly, as if it had brought me precisely where I was meant to stand. I moved around the graves carefully, sketching their pattern, measuring their spacing. One of the middle depressions had soil that smelled strange, sweet, and pungent, like overturned mulch on a wet day. I dug a little, pulled a core sample, and found no sign of roots or rot. It was like the ground had never been touched, and yet it was far too loose to be natural. I set up camp 30 feet away, keeping the graves just in sight but giving them respectful distance. No fire, just a dim lantern and my field journal. Around midnight, the woods pressed closer. The air thickened like a held breath. And then I heard it scratching, soft and deliberate, from beneath the ground. Not an animal scuffle, but something slower, heavier, like fingernails dragging against wood. I froze. The center grave, the 9th one I hadn't yet approached, began to move. At first it pulsed, as if a slow breath rose beneath it. Then the dirt split, and a pale, rotting hand clawed its way up from the earth. It wasn't skeletal. The skin was bloated, yellow-gray. The fingers curved like hooks, twitching slightly as it searched for something that wasn't there. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I just watched as the hand crept out just to the forearm and then stopped. I backed away, slowly, not daring to turn. My tent felt a mile behind me. Then I saw it, the cat had returned. sitting by the grave. It stared at me. Then it nodded. Not an animal twitch, a deliberate nod, like recognition or confirmation. I whispered, barely audible, "What is this?" But the cat didn't stay. It turned and padded back into the trees, silent as mist. I didn't sleep, just sat in the dark, lantern low, notebook beside me. When the sky started to lighten, I returned to the grave. The hand was gone. No sign of disturbance, no marks. Just the same dark soil I'd seen before. I flipped on through my notebook, wanting to review my sketches, but the page was blank. The layout, the measurements gone. Only one line remained, shaky and uneven, written in graphite that wasn't mine. "She's the 9th. I stared at it for a long time, heart racing. The soil on my boots was darker now, more red than the clay I'd walked through. I checked the count again. 8 graves, like before, but it felt like one of them had shifted. Or maybe I had. Back at the tent, I zipped everything closed, searched my pack for my lighter, and found it gone. I stepped toward the center grave again, and there it was, lying neatly on the soil. I picked it up. It was warm to the touch. That was 2 nights ago. Last night, I dreamt I was buried alive. Not dead, just unable to move or speak, with the sound of scratching above me. I woke gasping, sweat-soaked, clutching the lighter I had locked in my gear bag. And then I saw it again. The cat sitting just outside my tent, waiting. When I stepped out, it turned, calm as ever, and walked toward the graves. I followed. The second visit felt different. Not dreamlike, more like stepping into a place that had been waiting for me. The cat led again, but slower this time, as if it knew I'd follow without hesitation. The forest around us felt thinner, quieter. The birds didn't sing. Even the wind had gone still. When we reached the hollow, I noticed something I hadn't before. The center grave, the 9th, had grown deeper. I hadn't touched it. And yet the soil now formed a clean oval dip, as if shaped by careful hands. I set my lantern near the edge and stood just beyond its glow. I don't know what I expected, but it wasn't silence. No scratching, no movement, just the hollow, the graves, and that cat sitting like a shadow beside me. I crouched, placed my hand against the soil, warm still. But as I leaned closer, I felt something shift beneath my fingertips, not movement, presence. It was as if the earth exhaled. I stumbled back, heart stuttering, and looked at the other 8 graves. Their edges had softened overnight, almost as if time had brushed them gently inward. I opened my notebook to the blank page. That single line, "She's the 9th," was gone. In its place, written neatly in a tighter hand, was a list. 8 names. I didn't recognize a single one. But next to each was a date, each a year apart. The last October 27th, 2024. Yesterday. My stomach turned. I hadn't written these. No one else had access to my notes. Yet the pen strokes were precise, measured, like entries carved into headstones. There was one more line beneath the list, faint and slanted. "The soil remembers." My hand shook as I turned the page, hoping it was a mistake, but the rest of the notebook was blank. I tried to leave, packed my gear, zipped every pocket. I followed the same trail back toward my car, compass steady, GPS tracking. For an hour, I walked, the light changing, the trees beginning to blur. Then I saw it, the cat, sitting on a branch this time, high above, and just behind it, down the slope I'd just climbed, was the hollow. I hadn't moved at all. Somehow, I was back. The graves were right where I'd left them, undisturbed except the 9th was filled in, completely, smoothed and level. I rushed over, frantically scraping at the soil, just inches beneath the surface. I struck cloth. It was a shirt. My shirt, one I wasn't wearing, but owned. The same green flannel I'd packed in the bottom of my bag. I unzipped everything, pulled the gear out like a person possessed, but the shirt wasn't there. My bag was full, but one item short. Something else was missing too, a photograph I always kept in the back sleeve of my journal. My grandmother, taken at age 29. I checked, flipped the pages. Gone. Just gone, in its place. Tucked between the back cover and the final page was something new, a corner of old. Damp paper. A torn ledger page, with just a few faded words, entry complete. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't try. I sat with my back to a tree and the graves in full view. Lantern burning low, lighter in hand. I kept thinking about the list. 8 names, 8 years. 8 people drawn here one by one, like a ritual unfolding with the slow breath of the mountains. I remembered what one of the journals had warned: the 9th must arrive on her own. No summoning, no tricks, just a slow unraveling. I watched the cat pace between the graves, pausing sometimes to stare at the center, like it was guarding something or waiting for it to wake up. At 3:09 a.m., the earth opened again. Not just the 9th grave. All of them. Simultaneously. A low, rattling groan echoed beneath the soil as dozens of them began to emerge. Some skeletal, some bloated. One wore a wedding ring. One gripped a faded journal. Each clawed at the surface with blind persistence, rising only halfway before going still. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't answer. The air felt heavy, thick as syrup. My breath slowed. I felt the pulse in my neck stop matching my heartbeat. The lantern flickered, then went out. When the light returned gray and soft like pre-dawn fog, the graves were empty, not just undisturbed, but gone. No depressions, no signs of the night's horror, just flat, dry earth. My pack was gone too. In its place sat the cat, calm as a stone. It stood, stretched, and walked toward me. I followed because I had no choice. We stopped at the base of a sycamore tree, older than the others. Gnarled, bark stripped in long vertical scars. At its base, half buried in moss, was a stone I hadn't seen before. Freshly carved. My name, my birth date, no end date, just a faint line, waiting. The cat brushed past my legs and settled on the grave beneath it. That's when I noticed my boots were muddy, but not with soil, with clay, the color of old blood. I left the woods at sunrise. I don't remember how. I don't remember the trail. I just remember the air was colder and my hands were shaking. I haven't slept since. I still have the journal, now blank, except for one page. The list. 9 names now. I don't need to read the last one to know it's mine. The cat comes to my window every night now. It sits. It waits. One night soon. I think I'll follow it again. The first night I heard it, I thought it was the wind. A faint chime, barely audible over the hiss of snow and pine, like metal nudged gently by a gloved hand. But when it came again, sharper, more deliberate. I checked my watch. 2:13 a.m. Dead center of the night. My name's John Cresswell, 41. And for the last 9 seasons I've worked as a winter caretaker for old cemeteries up and down the Appalachian spine. The one in Crooked Hollow was different, hidden in a steep bowl of land 2 ridges from the nearest road. Used for quick burials during a fever outbreak in the 1940s. No one visited it now. No families, no flowers. Just the rows of thin stones, the kind you could topple with a hard frost. I lived in the chapel, or what was left of it, just 4 walls and a wood stove. My job was to keep the trails clear and the headstones from sinking too deep into the freeze. I wasn't superstitious, not anymore. But I'd heard the stories, that the bell in the chapel tower used to ring on its own, that once it stopped, people stopped dying. Or maybe it was the other way around. There was no bell now, just the rotted remains of a rope tied off in the rafters. Still, at 2:13 a.m. that first night, I stepped outside and followed the sound down the hill to the graves. The snow was light, barely a dusting, but I could see my own tracks clearly. Only mine. The sound came again, 3 short rings, like something was pulling a service bell with just enough strength to be noticed. I followed it to the far corner of the cemetery where the oldest stones leaned in strange angles, as if time had tried to erase them but ran out of patience. One grave stood apart. The bell was coming from there. I crouched beside it. The stone had no name, only a date, 1946. No first name, no epitaph. Just that year. And beneath it, a rusted metal ring bolted into the ground. The ring looked like something used to anchor a tent or moor a small boat. But as I brushed away the snow, I realized it was tied to a rope. Old, frayed hemp, maybe 20 feet long, disappearing down into the ground, into the grave. I didn't touch it. I went back to the chapel and didn't sleep. When morning came, I dug out the archives kept in the supply cabinet. A list of names, death dates, causes, fever, mostly, but nothing under 1946. The record stopped the year before. It was like the grave had been added quietly, outside the official end of the epidemic. The next night, I listened. The bell rang again. 2:13 a.m. On the dot, this time. I stood at the edge of the hollow and watched. No wind, no animals. Just that same sound, carried low, as if someone underground was tugging the rope slowly, not for escape, but to be remembered. It rang 5 times, then stopped. I didn't move. I stayed outside until the sky began to lighten and my boots were frozen stiff. In the pale dawn, I checked the grave again. The rope had shifted. Fresh drag lines in the snow traced a narrow arc from the ring, like it had been pulled with some force from beneath. That morning I called the county office, asked about the burial. The woman on the other end was polite, confused. That plot shouldn't exist. She told me there were only 83 bodies buried at Crooked Hollow. That stone's not on any of our maps. I asked if someone could have added it later. She hesitated. No one's been issued a permit out there in 78 years. On the 3rd night, the bell rang 12 times. I didn't wait until morning. I grabbed a lantern, my shovel, and walked back down. The grave was frozen around the edges. But the center was soft, unnaturally soft. I dug carefully at first, then with more urgency. 6 inches down, the rope thickened, stained dark. A foot below that, the soil turned wet, like something had been leaking upward. Another foot, and the lantern flickered. I paused, just beneath the shovel's blade. Something shifted. Not earth, something deeper. Something pulling down. The rope jerked. I dropped the shovel and fell back into the snow. The sound of the bell rang out once more. Not faint this time, but sharp. Angry. My lantern dimmed to a flicker, then steadied. I stared at the rope. It was taut now, pulled into the grave, like a vein running to something that still wanted breath. The snow around it had melted in a perfect ring, steam rising faintly into the cold night air. I don't know how long I sat there. When I finally looked away, I saw something else. Just beyond the grave, in the shadow of a leaning stone, stood a figure, small, still, watching. I called out. Nothing moved. I stepped toward it just one step and it was gone. I didn't report it. I told myself it was exhaustion, low light, tricks of the eye. But when I checked the snow the next morning, there were tracks small, bare footprints leading from the edge of the grave to the far tree line. No return path, just a single set, child-sized, pressing perfectly into the powder like someone had tiptoed away from their own burial. I followed them for a while, but they ended at the roots of a bent pine, like the earth had swallowed them whole. That evening, I found the chapel door ajar. I always locked it. Inside, nothing was missing, but the bell rope, the one rotted and coiled in the rafters, was gone. The nights grew colder. The bell kept ringing, 2:13 a.m. without fail, as though bound by something older than clocks. I tried sleeping through it. I drank. I played static through a portable radio, hoping it would drown it out. But the moment the minute struck, the chime would pierce everything clean, precise, no matter the wind or storm, and always from that same grave. On the 7th night, I stood over it again, lantern shaking in my hand. I called out this time, voice low, asking if someone was still there. The bell answered with a single, heavy clang that vibrated through my teeth. That same day, I found a box tucked into the chapel supply closet. I'd never seen it before. Old, wooden, carved with patterns too eroded to identify. Inside were bell clappers, 6 of them rusted but intact. One was wrapped in cloth, cleaner than the others. Beneath it, a note, written in an old cursive hand. Only the one with no tongue may ring. I didn't understand it then, not fully, but something deep inside me shifted, like a lock turning the wrong way. I took the wrapped clapper to the grave and held it out, unsure why I felt compelled. The rope twitched. The next night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat outside the chapel with the bell clapper on my lap, waiting. At exactly 2:13, the bell rang again, but not from the grave this time. It came from behind me. I turned. Slowly. The tower, long empty, stood silhouetted against the stars. And from it, clear as breath, another ring. I climbed the steps, each one groaning like it hadn't been touched in decades. At the top, nothing. No bell, no rope, just a void where the sound had come from. I stepped back down and found the grave rope slack again, coiled like a serpent ready to lunge. On the 9th night, it all changed. The bell didn't ring. For the first time since I arrived, the hollow stayed silent. I waited until 3, then 4. Nothing. I should have felt relief, but dread sat deeper. The next morning, the grave was open, a perfect rectangle of absence. The rope gone, soil undisturbed, but hollowed out completely. I leaned over the edge. I don't know what I expected a coffin. Maybe bones. But there was nothing. Just the rope, continuing downward into a narrow tunnel that vanished into darkness. I dropped a stone. Never heard it land. That afternoon, I heard humming. A child's lullaby, warped by distance and echo. It came from the tree line near the bent pine, where the footprints had vanished. I followed the sound and found a small bell, just a service bell like you'd find at a counter perched on a stump. No rope, just the bell and a smear of ash beneath it. When I touched it, it didn't ring. Instead, the ground beneath the stump cracked. A whisper slid out from the gap. I didn't catch the words, just the shape of them, like something trying to remember how to speak. That night, I dreamt I was inside the grave, not trapped, but waiting. Above me, someone dug. The soil shifted. The rope tightened across my chest like a cord of breath. I opened my mouth to call out, but my tongue was gone. In its place, a lump of metal. I woke gagging, cold sweat soaking my sheets. The bell clapper was gone from my bedside table. I never brought it inside. I tried to leave Crooked Hollow the next morning, but my truck wouldn't start. Battery drained, gas line frozen. I packed what I could and set out on foot, but the trail looped. I walked 6 hours only to find myself back at the chapel, frostbitten and shaking. The bell rang again as I stepped inside. Not 2:13. This time, it rang at dawn. One long, unbroken tone. I covered my ears, but it wasn't coming from outside. It was inside my head. I dropped to the floor, passed out. When I woke, the chapel was gone. Not destroyed, just absent. I stood in an open clearing where the walls had been. No wood, no stove, just snow. And in the center, a stone marker, freshly carved. My name, no date. Just a narrow gap where time had yet to finish writing. I turned, and in the distance, the bell rang once more. I started running again after my sister passed. Grief moves in strange directions. Mine took the shape of morning trails and cold air. My name's Lena Holt, 35, freelance illustrator, Asheville-based. I used to draw stories from old places, ghost towns, rail lines swallowed by trees. But now I just run. The woods behind our neighborhood press up against what used to be a cemetery, though they moved the stones decades ago to a cleaner, more visible plot nearer to town. The ground kept the memory, though I always felt it, the hum beneath the moss, the way the pines leaned in to listen. Most mornings, I stuck to the known trails. They looped clean, crossed little creeks, followed the rise of the ridge and brought me home in just under an hour. But on the first frost of November, I found a new turn. It wasn't much a narrow gap between two dogwoods, just wide enough to slip through without snagging your sleeves. I don't remember it being there before. No signs, no cuts in the brush, just open. I didn't hesitate. My feet carried me into it like they'd been waiting. The path was quiet, softer somehow. The kind of silence that feels watched. No bird calls. No squirrels scattering in the undergrowth. Just the steady rhythm of my breath and the whisper of my soles against packed dirt. The trees grew thinner as I went, the trunks pale and straight, like they'd never known a storm. Then I noticed the smell, earthy, but laced with something sweet, almost like lilies. The trail curved gently, and that's when I saw the first face. It was a man, standing just off the trail. Gray jacket, faded jeans, not moving. He wasn't blurry, wasn't ghost-like, just there. Solid, familiar. My lungs froze. It was my old neighbor, Mr. Redlin. He passed away 6 years ago, just after the power company cut the back line through his property. I remembered the funeral-closed casket. Heart failure, they said. But here he was. His head tilted as I ran past, but he didn't speak, just watched. I kept going, faster. But the trail didn't end. It kept unfolding beneath me, like it had no intention of looping back. Around the next bend, I saw a young girl crouched by a tree, tying her shoes. She looked up, big eyes, dirt-smeared cheeks, and smiled. I knew her too. Carrie Duveau. She'd gone missing in 7th grade, never found. Her face was on every telephone pole that summer. And there she was, no older than the day she disappeared. I stumbled, slowed, tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. She just waved. The path began to feel wrong beneath my feet. The dirt no longer gave. It felt firm, like old stone painted to look like soil. I stopped, turned to look behind me, but the trail was gone. No break in the trees, no footprints, just forest. I checked my watch. The second hand ticked backward for 2 full turns before freezing. My pulse climbed. I backed up, then heard it footsteps. Not mine, behind me. Light, careful, matching my rhythm, but moving in reverse. I turned again and saw no one, but the sound continued, slightly delayed now, like an echo running backward through a canyon. I tried calling out, no answer. I pulled out my phone, no service, no GPS. The screen flickered once, then showed a message I didn't type. You're almost there. My breath caught. I pocketed it, broke into a full sprint. Then the trees opened into a small clearing I'd never seen on any map. No gravestones, just 2 pillars of stone on either side, worn smooth, like time had rubbed the names away. Between them was an empty space, freshly turned earth, small, child-sized. My legs buckled slightly. The air smelled of lilies again, stronger now, and underneath, metal, rust, maybe, or blood. Something rustled behind me. I turned, heart in my throat, expecting another face. But it was just leaves falling. Then, at the base of the nearest tree, I saw something sticking from the dirt, a footprint, not mine. It pointed the wrong way. Backward. It was barefoot, narrow, and deeply pressed, like the person who left it had been standing still for a long time. I stepped toward it, against every instinct I had. That's when I heard my name, not shouted, whispered, from multiple directions at once. Lena, soft, dragging, like the woods themselves were trying the name out loud. I froze. My body wanted to run, but my feet felt planted, held. I dropped to one knee, pressed my hand to the ground for balance, and felt it throb beneath me like a pulse in the dirt. I stood up, slowly, eyes scanning the trees. That's when I saw them. All around the clearing, faces, watching from between the trunks. Faces I knew my sister, pale and silent, a teacher from grade school, a boy who drowned in the quarry. No one moved, no one blinked. They didn't step forward. They were just waiting. They didn't speak. They didn't move. They only stared, like portraits given breath, too ancient to remember motion. My legs finally broke free of the stillness, but my steps were slow, reluctant. Each movement felt wrong, like the trail had begun rewriting the rules of gravity. I turned back to where I thought the path had been, but the pillars blocked my way taller now, closer. The fresh earth between them looked disturbed, like something had either crawled out or was waiting just beneath. My name still hung in the air, low and trembled, echoing through the bark and branches as if the forest was remembering me aloud. I stepped back toward the trees, forcing my breath into rhythm. The air had grown thick, not with fog, but with weight, like standing beneath deep water. The faces didn't blink. My sister's eyes followed me as I moved, but her mouth never opened. I called her name Erin, but the sound came out flat, swallowed by the space between us. She didn't smile, didn't frown, just stood, watching. A single tear rolled down her cheek. That broke me more than anything. Erin had never cried when she was alive, not once. The backward footsteps started again, behind me. Quick now, urgent. I spun and caught a glimpse of someone slipping behind a tree. I chased after them, anything to break the spell of the clearing. The forest here felt tighter, the trees bending slightly inward like eaves of an old church. Every 20 steps or so, I would see another footprint, always facing the wrong direction, always fresh. At one point I found 2 sets, side by side, one large, one small. They ended at a tree with a scar carved into its bark, a spiral etched in perfect lines. So deep, the sap still wept. I checked my watch again. Still frozen. My phone was dead now. The screen a faint mirror reflecting my own pale face. I ran. No more hesitation. I ran with every cell in me screaming. The forest tried to blur, but I refused to let it. I named trees aloud, named birds I couldn't hear, named my sister again and again, as if it would keep me tethered. After what felt like hours, the trees broke again, and I found myself at the edge of another clearing, but this one was different. Empty, dead silent. No stones, no faces, just a single wooden sign nailed to a post, no path beyond it. The sign read, "Turn back." The wood was old, the letters uneven, carved by hand. I hesitated. Something in my chest told me I had been here before, though I knew I hadn't. A terrible familiarity, like walking into a dream you swore you didn't have. I looked down and saw a footprint again. Mine. Same tread, same width. Already there. Pointed toward the sign. Then I noticed the second set beside it identical. Not a reflection, but a match. 2 versions of me had stood here before. I turned to leave and found the forest had shifted. The trees behind me were closer now, forming a wall, bark to bark. No gaps, just vertical lines of silence. And still, no sound, not even the wind. I whispered Erin's name again. Still no answer. I pressed forward, hand on the signpost like it might steady me. The wood was warm, almost feverish, and I noticed something scratched faintly on its back side. Smaller letters, a name, mine. Beneath it, a single date, tomorrow. I fell to my knees. My breath came fast, uneven. I didn't know if I was still dreaming. I tried to remember how I'd gotten here, how many turns I'd taken. I closed my eyes and imagined the trail, retraced every bend, every face. But when I opened them, the ground had changed. Beneath my hands, The soil was gone, just cold stone, like old marble, cracked and veined with something dark. A narrow seam ran beneath my palms, and as I leaned in, I heard a sound beneath the rock. A voice. Mine. It whispered the same phrase. Over and over, "You were always here." I stood slowly. My limbs ached now, not with exhaustion, but with age. I looked at my hands, older, the skin looser, lined. My nails had dirt beneath them I didn't remember placing there. I touched my face. My cheek felt unfamiliar. I turned back to the trees. But they were receding now, the path opening again, but only deeper. I could see the faint edge of the original trail. Faded, almost erased, like the memory of a dream slipping at sunrise. I moved toward it, each step harder than the last. At the very edge, where the new path might have ended or begun, sat a stone, simple, blank. I brushed off the dirt and found an inscription so shallow it could barely hold shadow. You turned around. That's all. I knelt there for a long while, breathing unevenly, until I heard footsteps one more time. These were louder, confident. I stood to see who it was, and saw myself, not aged, not mirrored, just me, approaching with cautious steps. We locked eyes. Neither of us spoke. The forest held its breath between us. Then I realized she hadn't seen me yet. I was standing just out of the firelight. I didn't mean to find it. I was supposed to be cataloging headstones, nothing more. My name's Nathan Lorne, 26, second-year archaeology grad out of Knoxville. We were sent to survey what was left of a limestone cemetery near the collapsed chapel at Ferndale Rise. It's the kind of place maps no longer name, tucked behind laurel and forgotten fences. Most of the stones had cracked from decades of freeze, the engravings shallow and half lost to moss. But one grave drew me in. A simple brick vault built too low into the hillside, uneven, like someone had rushed the job. The stone was sunken, its inscription unreadable, and behind it, one brick sat askew. It was colder near that grave. Not by much, just enough to notice once I crouched. I slipped my fingers into the gap behind the brick and felt something dry, old, but untouched by decay. I knew I shouldn't. We were only here to photograph and document. But curiosity has a voice, and mine spoke louder than caution. I eased the brick free. Dust and dried moss fell from behind it, revealing a narrow cavity between stone and soil. Inside, wrapped in yellowed cloth, was a box, wooden, no hinges, carved faintly with runes I didn't recognize. I felt a weight in my chest before I even opened it. Inside were three things: a braid of hair, brittle and gray, a cluster of human fingernails, still curled, and a slip of paper stiff with age. But the ink still sharp. The date at the top made my breath catch. November 12th, 2025. Tomorrow. The rest of the note was brief. You should not have come. Now it remembers. I stared at it, trying to make sense of the date, the message. The way the handwriting seemed familiar, though I couldn't place it. I put the box back. I shouldn't have. But something about it felt like it wasn't done with me. That night, back at the university cabin, I couldn't sleep. The others joked about snakes and ghost stories over instant noodles. But I stayed quiet, eyes locked on the edge of my bunk. I felt wrong. like I'd brushed against something that had noticed. At 3:07 a.m., I woke up choking. Not from a dream, from the smell. It was faint, but distinct rot laced with something sweet, like spoiled perfume. I turned on the light. My boots were gone. I found them outside, just beside the fire pit, soles caked in red clay we hadn't dug through. The next morning, we returned to the site. I didn't mention the box. I wanted to pretend it hadn't happened. But the grave where I found it had changed. The brick I removed was back in place, too clean, too flush with the others, like it had never been touched. But the earth around the grave had shifted, sunk more than it should have overnight. I measured it. 3 inches lower. Not collapse. Descent. And something new, a single long crack in the stone marker, running like a fault line from name to date. That night, I dreamed I was inside the vault. Not buried, not dead, just sealed. I could hear voices above me. Someone was digging. Not down, but across, whispering in a language I didn't know. When I woke, the braid of hair was on my pillow. I didn't scream. I just stared at it for a long time. Then checked the box. Still in my pack, still sealed. But the note was missing. I told myself I'd leave the next day. I'd tell the department the site was unstable, maybe contaminated. But when I opened my notebook to log the day's findings, every page had changed. The margins were filled with symbols, runes repeated in looping rows. One word kept appearing: bind. Some were scrawled in red, smeared like blood. I tried tearing them out, but they reappeared in the next notebook I opened, as if the pages had begun to duplicate themselves. Around noon, one of the other students, Riley, noticed something strange. A grave near the chapel had collapsed. Not from erosion. It had fallen straight in, like something had caved from underneath. We approached cautiously, peered into the pit. It was hollow, empty, no coffin, just dirt pressed smooth, too perfect to be natural. I leaned closer and felt warmth rising from below, like the breath of someone just out of sight. That's when I noticed the fingernails. Under my own. I didn't tell the others. I couldn't. What would I say? That something from a sealed box had found its way beneath my skin? That my own hands now bore traces of a stranger's death? I sat in my tent that evening, unrolling the sleeves of my shirt again and again, inspecting my fingers under the dim light. The cuticles looked normal, but the undersides just beneath the nails were red, irritated. And when I pressed them to the lantern glass, I saw a faint glint in the blood slivers, almost like splinters, but too pale, too curved. I tried to pull one out with tweezers. It didn't move. Later that night, a wind picked up, sharp and wrong for the season, dry and sour, like something turning in the ground. The others zipped into their tents, tired from the day's digging. But I couldn't lie down. I heard rustling near the grave we'd found collapsed, like someone pacing in a circle around it. I stepped out, barefoot, not thinking. The fire had gone out. There were no flashlights, no headlamps, just the moon, full and dull through thin clouds, casting long shadows between the stones. As I reached the grave's edge, I saw something small and dark lying just at the lip. My notebook. It had been in my bag when I zipped it earlier. Now it lay open, pages fluttering in the breeze. I knelt to pick it up, but the page it had opened to wasn't one I'd written. It was a new entry, the same faint hand from the note inside the box. This time it read, "You kept it. It keeps you." My breath clouded the air. The warmth from earlier had returned, but not from the earth this time. From the box. I hadn't touched it since that first night. I dug it out of my pack and placed it in the dirt beside the grave. The wood had changed. It looked damp now, swollen slightly at the seams. The carvings along the edges were deeper, cleaner, as though time had sharpened them. I opened the lid slowly. The hair was gone. So were the fingernails. Only the note had returned, rewritten again. It needs another. That's when I heard Riley scream. We all ran. Her tent had collapsed, and she was curled inside it, eyes wide, mouth shaking with a scream too high to hold breath. When we pulled her out, she kept pointing at her hands, clawing at her skin. She couldn't stop whispering the word underneath, over and over. We tried calming her, lighting the fire, offering water. But when she finally stilled, we saw what she'd meant. Her fingernails had begun to lift, not fall off, lift, as though something beneath was trying to replace them. She didn't sleep that night. None of us did. The next day, 2 of the students left early. They claimed they had unrelated commitments, but I saw the fear in their eyes. They wouldn't even look at the chapel ruins as they hiked out. That afternoon, I stayed behind while the others documented another row of graves. I found myself drawn to the back of the chapel wall, where the foundations had split. An old brick tumbled into shadow. There, half buried under mortar dust, was another box, identical, wrapped in damp cloth, my name carved faintly into the lid. I didn't open it. I ran. I ran until my lungs burned and the hills blurred. When I came back to camp, my first box, the original, was gone. I never told the others I'd found it again. I just lay down in my tent and closed my eyes, willing the night to pass quickly. But time had started looping strangely. The sun took too long to rise. When it finally did, we found the soil beside the collapsed grave disturbed once more, dragged outward, like something had crawled away. That morning, the final student left. Just me and Riley remained. She barely spoke, her hands wrapped in gauze, fingernails nearly gone now. That evening, I sat near the grave, staring into the open dirt, wondering what it wanted, wondering what any of this meant. That's when I saw the hair again coiled beside the grave, like it had risen from the soil. A braid, longer this time, still gray, still bound in the same faded ribbon, and just beside it, pressed flat into the dirt, a perfect handprint. It wasn't mine. It was larger, older, familiar in a way that made my stomach turn. I didn't sleep. I stayed up sketching the runes, trying to make sense of them, to decode something from their repetition. They formed a circle, always closed, always containing. I traced the largest one into the dirt, just to see what would happen. Nothing at first. Then my lantern dimmed and the earth around the grave let out a breath. That breath became words. They came from below. You opened it. I dropped the lantern, stumbled back. Riley was standing now, half conscious, eyes wide. Her hands were bleeding through the gauze. And between us, where the grave had been, the ground fell away. No bones, no coffin. Just a narrow shaft into dark, lined with more boxes, each bearing a name. Some I recognized from old rosters. One bore the name of a professor I hadn't seen since first semester. One was mine. I left the next morning. I didn't pack, didn't explain. Riley stayed, She said the grave wanted her now. I didn't argue. I walked until I saw pavement, then didn't stop walking. But sometimes, late at night, I find dirt beneath my fingernails. And once, not long ago, I found a new box waiting on my doorstep. They say some hills weren't meant to hold the living. My name's Becca Allen. I'm 24. Recently moved back to the edge of Bledsoe County after my mom passed. She left me the house, her journals, and too many questions. The property backs up to a narrow ridge with a single oak at the top, gnarled and alone, its roots stretching out like fingers frozen mid-crawl. I used to play up there when I was little, but I always came back before dusk. Mom said the hill was for silence, not for prayer, not for play, just silence. She never explained what that meant. It was a warm October morning when I first unearthed the cross. I wasn't looking for anything, just clearing out old brush near the roots of the oak where the ground rose, uneven, soft in places. My shovel struck something wooden. I cleared it gently, expecting a box or maybe an old tool. But it was a small cross, maybe 8 inches long, carved roughly from oak wood itself. And it had been buried upside down, point driven into the soil. I lifted it. The wood was smooth despite its age, dark with years of damp. But it felt wrong in my hand. Too warm, like something that had been recently held. I brought it home. I don't know why. I placed it on the mantel, half thinking it might have been a lost heirloom or something Mom forgot to mention in the journals that night. I heard knocking. Not on the door, on the window by the kitchen, where the yard faces the hill. It was soft. 3 slow knocks, as if someone was pressing gently with bone. I turned on the porch light. Nothing there. No footprints. Just the wind twisting up from the slope, carrying a scent of soil turned too soon. The next morning, the cross was gone from the mantel. I found it outside, near the oak again, not lying on the ground, buried, upright this time, but deeper like the roots had drawn it back down. I dug it up again, slower now. Not sure why I felt guilty. The wood was colder than before, heavier. I left it outside. That night, the oak glowed, just faintly. A dull green pulse, like something beneath the bark was alive and watching. I stared at it from my window for a long time before I dared to sleep. The following day, I asked around. My neighbor, Mr. Kinley, has lived out here longer than anyone. When I described the cross, he went quiet. His eyes drifted up toward the ridge, and he said, "That hill remembers the ones they couldn't hang." I asked what he meant, but he shook his head, murmured something about sins buried instead of confessed, about a preacher who tried to sanctify the land and vanished after his 3rd visit. I didn't believe him. Not really. But that night, I checked Mom's journals again. She had written a single page marked only with a date, October 13th. 15 years ago. Buried it again. Deeper this time. It keeps coming back. I slept badly. Every creak in the floor sounded like footsteps from beneath. At dawn, I hiked back to the tree. The cross was there again, this time laid on the surface, perfectly centered beneath the roots. The dirt hadn't been disturbed, no signs of digging. It was just there, waiting. I didn't touch it. I stood above it for a long time, and the longer I stood, the colder the air grew. A heavy stillness settled in, pressing on my chest, until I backed away without taking it. That evening, I walked the edge of the hill again, flashlight in hand. As I passed a patch of older stones barely visible through the brush, I noticed something odd. Dozens of small holes in the dirt, each exactly the width of the cross, like someone had buried and unburied it over and over in different places. I counted 13. The last one was still damp. When I looked up, I saw the glow again, not from the tree, but from beneath it. A steady pulse now, deep and rhythmic, like the echo of a buried heart. I didn't go out that night, but something knocked again, this time on the back door. No one uses that entrance. I found no prints, only red clay smeared beneath the handle, and a narrow streak across the floor where the door had cracked open. Just a few inches, I closed it, locked it, turned every light on in the house. The cross wasn't where I left it. It was back inside, on my kitchen table. I didn't move it. I swear I didn't. Yet there it was, sitting dead center on my kitchen table, damp with soil and pine needles still clinging to its base. I stared at it for what felt like an hour, too afraid to touch it, too ashamed to ignore it. I thought about burning it, but something deep in me recoiled at the idea. Not fear, something worse. Like the feeling you get when you realize you've spoken too loudly in a room that's been quiet for centuries. So instead, I wrapped it in an old towel and buried it again, farther out this time, down near the gully past the fence line. But even as I covered the hole, I could feel it watching from behind me. Or maybe it wasn't the cross. Maybe it was the tree. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind howled louder than it should have, rising in strange patterns, stopping dead at intervals like something listening. At 2:46 a.m., I heard a thump, then another, slow, deliberate, on the front porch. I gripped the bat I kept beside the bed and opened the door. Nothing. But down the hill, the oak was glowing again, brighter this time, like its roots had caught fire deep underground. The light didn't flicker. It pulsed, steady, timed, like breath. And from somewhere near the base, I could hear a faint creaking, wood against wood, like rope twisting around a branch. In the morning, I checked the gully. The cross was gone again. I stood over the empty hole, heart sinking. Then I saw the footprints, bare, adult-sized, and caked in red clay. They led from the empty hole, up the hill, straight to the oak. There, half buried in the roots again, was the cross, now upside down once more, just like the first time. The dirt around it was undisturbed, but the roots had shifted, curled tighter, like they were pulling something inward. I didn't touch it this time. I turned and left. But as I reached the edge of the ridge, I looked back and I swear I saw something hanging from one of the higher branches. Just for a moment. Then it was gone. Back at the house, I searched Mom's journals again. I'd skimmed them before, but now I read every page. And there, buried near the end, I found a line I must have missed before if it comes back. Don't rebury it. That's what feeds it. She'd written it in red ink, underlined twice, and below it, smaller, that hill doesn't forget. And it never forgives. I slammed the book shut. The silence in the house felt heavier than it had before. Every creak of the floor, every distant pop of wood expanding with the morning heat made me flinch. By evening, I had a plan. I drove out to the old Catholic cemetery 30 miles east, bought a bottle of holy water, a crucifix, and a small wooden box. I didn't tell the clerk what it was for, just nodded, paid, and left. That night, I found the cross again on my porch this time, standing straight up in the flower box, surrounded by wilting mums. I picked it up with gloved hands and placed it in the box, poured the water over it until the wood hissed and steamed like it was burning. Then I sealed the box with nails and wrapped it in chain. I buried it in the cellar, beneath the old cement slab that used to hold the washing machine. I felt better, briefly, lighter even. But at 3:12 a.m., I woke to the smell of smoke. The house wasn't on fire, but the air tasted burnt, bitter like ash. I went to the back door, open again. I hadn't unlocked it. The cross was sitting just outside, upright in the snow that had fallen after sunset. No box, no chain, just the cross, glistening wet, but unmarred. It hadn't been buried. It had been waiting. I didn't sleep. I paced the house, lights on, praying in a voice I hadn't used since childhood. I spoke my mother's name aloud, hoping maybe she'd answer. But the only sound I got was a slow tapping from the attic, soft and rhythmic. I didn't go up. I knew what I'd find. I made coffee at dawn, sat at the kitchen table, and waited for the sun to burn away whatever had crept in. But when I looked outside, the oak had changed. It had bloomed. In the middle of winter, blood-red blossoms clung to its branches like wounds. I left that day, packed only what I needed. I locked the door, knowing it wouldn't matter. The hill was never going to let go. Even now, I still feel it. Wherever I stay, the tree finds me. I've seen it at the edge of fields, reflected in windows that shouldn't show it. I've heard knocking in motel rooms with no doors behind the walls. And once, just last week, I found the cross again, on the dashboard of my car, upright, clean, waiting. I didn't touch it, I just whispered, "I'm sorry," and drove on. It started with a photograph. My grandfather left it for me, tucked inside the back page of his will, folded so tight it had yellowed at the creases. No note, no explanation, just an old sepia print dated 1902 showing a grave between two pillars of stone. The rest of the cemetery stretching out behind it like a faded dream. I'm Ben Mathers, 32, part-time historical archivist. And until that morning, I'd never seen anything in his papers I couldn't trace. But this wasn't listed in any public archive. No location on the back, no recognizable markings, just the grave, the two standing stones, and a blurred figure with a hand resting on the shoulder of a small boy in the foreground. That boy, I realized after squinting, was my grandfather. At first, I assumed it was a double exposure, a flaw in the developing process. But when I scanned the image and blew it up, the figure didn't fade. In fact, it came into sharper focus: long coat, wide brim hat, and a hand that looked too long, the fingers angled like they hadn't bent in decades. And the face, it wasn't missing. It was wrong. Eyes set too far apart, a jaw that curved the wrong way. I shut the laptop and tried to laugh it off. But the unease settled deep. That night, I dreamed of standing between those same two stone pillars. I could feel soil under my boots, damp and loose. I woke with dirt on my sheets and a sharp ache behind my eyes. The next morning, I drove out to the ridge where my grandfather grew up. The family farm was long gone. But the town record still listed an old cemetery nearby, one that had been relocated after a flood in the 1960s. I walked the land anyway. Followed the slope until I found a break in the tree line. The ground flattened by memory. I knew it was the place. not because of what I saw, but because of what I didn't. Between two crumbling stone markers, just as in the photo, there was nothing. No grave, no stone, just a bare patch of earth, darker than the rest, like it had never really dried. I knelt beside it, ran my fingers across the soil. It crumbled too easily, like it had just been turned. No weeds, no rocks, just soft, dark earth. I snapped a photo, checked the angle, perfect match with the one from 1902. I tried to feel proud of the find, but something about the spot made my skin prickle. I returned home and enlarged the new image. That's when I saw it. In the far corner of the frame, barely visible in the shadows, was the same figure. Still blurry, still there. This time, the hand wasn't on a shoulder. It was pointing directly at me. I told myself I'd misaligned the shot, that maybe it was a trick of light. Some branch caught at the edge of frame. But that night, I woke again to the same dream, standing between the stones. Soil shifting beneath my boots. Only this time, I wasn't alone. I felt someone behind me, breathing, cold and dry against the back of my neck. I turned in the dream, but the world stayed still. I couldn't move, couldn't see. I only heard one phrase, whispered so close it trembled in my teeth. You finally came. The next morning, I found the grave. Not in the woods, not on the hill. In my backyard, where there had only been grass the day before. There was now a patch of turned earth, fresh, damp, even steaming slightly in the cold morning air. A stone marker sat at the head, small, new, chiseled with a name I recognized immediately, my own, and below it, the same date carved, twice birth date. And then tomorrow, just that, nothing else. I stumbled back inside, locked every door. I checked the yard again 5 minutes later. The grave was gone, no stone, no dirt, just perfect, untouched grass. I ran inside, flipped through my grandfather's old notebooks, found one entry I'd missed dated 1989. He followed me back, took the shape of a grave. I didn't dig. It still opened. That night, I tried not to sleep, but dreams are louder than fear. And when I closed my eyes, I found myself walking, always toward the same hill, always between the same stones. And the grave was waiting. I called in sick the next day. There was no way I could sit in an office pretending everything was fine while I kept thinking about that stone, my name etched in it, the impossible date beneath. I went out to the yard again just after sunrise, hoping it had been some kind of breakdown, hallucination, maybe. But the grass was still perfect, unbroken, not a blade out of place, except when I walked across it. The ground felt soft, too soft, like something shallow had been filled and packed down in a hurry. I drove back out to the old site that afternoon. I brought tools this time, a small spade, a ground probe, a trowel. I don't know what I was looking for exactly. Maybe bones, maybe a reason to dismiss everything else. But when I reached the spot between the two stone pillars, the soil had changed again. It looked dug, then reburied. A small depression in the shape of a narrow box. I pressed the probe down. It slid far too easily, nearly to the handle. When I pulled it back up, the metal was streaked with something dark and wet. I started digging. Slow at first, careful. But the deeper I went, the colder the soil became. Not just damp, frigid, like winter buried in midsummer ground. A few inches deeper and I struck wood. Not coffin wood, Crude, rough sawn planks, warped and nailed into place without care. I scraped around the edges, found no lid, just a flat board covering a hollow space. When I pried it up, there was no body, just a photograph. My grandfather, as a boy, standing in that same graveyard. Only now, in this version of the photo, he wasn't alone. I was there too. A perfect replica of me, standing behind him, hand resting on his shoulder, smiling. I dropped the photo and ran. I didn't collect my tools, didn't fill in the hole. I drove back to my house in silence, radio off, phone dead again for the second time this week. I stood at the back door for a long time before going inside. I knew what I'd see, and I still wasn't ready for it. The grave had returned. This time, it wasn't outside. It was inside the house. The living room rug had been peeled back, floorboards cracked open beneath it, a rectangle of packed earth, centered perfectly, as if the house had been built to fit around it. I didn't scream, just sat on the floor and stared. After a while, I noticed the dirt was breathing, just slightly, barely noticeable, rising and falling like something sleeping beneath. My mind couldn't hold what I was seeing. I told myself it wasn't real, that it couldn't be. But then I looked at the wall. A new photo had been hung there, framed in wood I didn't recognize. Another shot of the graveyard, more recent. This one showed the empty patch where the grave had been. In it, standing just between the two stones, was me, from behind, watching. That night, I dreamt in silence. No wind, no breath, no words, just movement. The sound of dirt being shoveled above me, the scrape of metal, the thud of earth hitting a lid. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. The soil pressed against my mouth like a hand. When I woke, my bed was covered in dirt, my nails packed with clay, and in my hand was the same photo I'd found in the box. I tried to burn it, took it outside, doused it in lighter fluid, lit a match. It curled, blackened at the edges, then reappeared an hour later on my kitchen counter. I buried it. It came back, I shredded it. It returned whole. That afternoon, the phone rang. A landline I hadn't used in years. I answered. There was no voice, just a faint scraping, like nails on wood. Then a whisper, one more night. I didn't sleep. I sat on the floor beside the grave, cross-legged, waiting for something to emerge. But it never opened. Not fully, just pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat. I closed my eyes for only a second. When I opened them, the grave had been filled. A small stone marker rested on top. My name. The date was today. I packed what I could, left the house behind. I live 3 counties over now. Never speak of what happened. But sometimes, when I walk too long in the woods or look too long at a photograph, I feel it. That grave is still following me. It doesn't need to stay in one place. It only needs to be seen. And once it's seen you, it never leaves. The storm came fast that morning, and hard rain, steep winds, and a landslide that carved half the trail from the hillside like it had been cut with a blade. I was leading a small tour group through Haven's Crest, a highland cemetery mostly known for its views and war monuments, not its dead. My name's Olivia Brand, 31, part-time guide, full-time caretaker since the state cut funding. We were rerouted mid-hike took a detour down a slope I usually avoided. But the ground had split there, revealing something I hadn't seen before. It's a row of sunken wooden coffins, half buried in the earth like teeth in a broken jaw. It wasn't on any map, no signs, no markers, just rough wood and dark soil, wet from the rain. One of the coffins had cracked open near the middle. The lid was warped, splintered at the hinges, and inside, you could see the remains, only it wasn't what you'd expect. No bones, no dust, just a hand, dried, curled like a dying branch, pressed flat against the inside of the coffin's roof, not lying still, clinging. I stepped closer, heart thudding against the inside of my throat, and the hand seemed almost fresh, not recent, but not entirely gone, either. You could still see the curve of the knuckles, the tips of the fingernails. It looked like whoever was buried had tried to get out and never made it. I called the county, took photos, marked the GPS, but no one answered. The road out was blocked from the slide, and we'd have to hike back out tomorrow. The tourists were uneasy, 3 couples and a man traveling alone. They asked questions I couldn't answer, mostly about whether this was part of the site. I said no. We set up camp just off the ridge, in a flat space near the old ranger cabin. I didn't mention the hand when we sat around the fire that night. I thought maybe I could forget about it. But sometime after midnight, the lone traveler, he never gave his name, left his tent. I saw him walking down toward the ridge, flashlight bobbing. I almost called out, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the wind, or the way he moved too quiet, too steady, like he already knew where he was going. I dozed for an hour, maybe less. Then I heard him scream. We found him sitting just beyond the exposed grave, trembling. He wouldn't speak, wouldn't look at any of us. His hands were scratched and raw, and when we checked his tent, the sleeping bag was torn down the center, from the inside. The others whispered the rest of the day, avoided the topic, but none of them left. We couldn't. By dusk, we'd agreed to keep watch and shifts, just in case. No one admitted what we were afraid of, but I could feel it hanging thick in the air. Something about the place had changed. At some point in the night, I woke to the sound of tapping. Not wood on wood, flesh. A soft, insistent knock, knock, knock against the window of the ranger cabin where I'd taken shelter. I sat up slowly. The lantern was still lit. The fire had died. I walked to the window, heart crawling up my throat. And there it was, a hand, pressed flat against the glass from the inside. I backed away, nearly tripping over my own boots. The cabin hadn't been opened in years, the windows sealed. There was no way anyone could have gotten in without me knowing. I turned and ran, found the others still asleep. No sign of panic. But the man who'd wandered, he was gone. His tent stood empty, clean, zipped, like he'd never been there at all, except for one thing on his sleeping bag, a glove. Laid out neatly, not folded, just resting there, palm up. In the morning, we returned to the grave. The lid was fully open now, the coffin completely exposed. But the hand was gone. No bones, no trace. Just the faint impression of fingers against the rotted wood above. We didn't speak. We just packed our gear and hiked out. The road had reopened. The officials finally answered my calls. But when I showed them the photos, they shrugged. No such graves out there. One said, that ridge was cleared in the 1920s. I tried not to think about it. But 2 nights after I returned home, I found a new photo slipped under my door. No return address, no note. Just an image of the cabin window taken from the inside. The hand was still there. I stared at the photo for a long time before I touched it. It was glossy, professionally developed, edges clean, the image too crisp to be old. Someone had taken it recently from the inside of the ranger cabin, which had been locked for decades before our visit. The hand on the window was clearer now. You could make out the grain of the skin, the cracks in the knuckles. But the part that stayed with me wasn't the hand. It was the faint shape just behind it, something like a face reflected in the glass. Though the features didn't line up right. Too much space between the eyes. A mouth set too low. I burned the photo in the sink, watched it curl and blacken until it fell to ash. Then I went to bed. But I didn't sleep. At 3:14 a.m., I woke to the sound of wood bending. Not cracking, not splintering, just shifting, like something inside the walls was adjusting itself. I sat up in the dark and felt my own breath fog in the room. Though the night wasn't cold, I turned on the light. No one there. But on the inside of my bedroom window, there was moisture. A perfect handprint in the center. I wiped it with my sleeve, heart pounding, and backed away without turning around. The same feeling from the graves had followed me home, something unfinished, something waiting. I tried to return to normal. I didn't tell anyone from the group, didn't call the forestry office. But a week later, one of the couples from the tour emailed me. They didn't say much, just that they'd heard tapping on their motel window 2 nights in a row. The third night, their phone took a photo on its own, a black frame, mostly except in the corner. A single pale hand, reaching out from shadow. They checked out and never replied again. I wanted to tell them about the man who disappeared, about the glove. But I didn't, because I didn't think the thing was following all of us. I think it was following me. I went back to Haven's Crest, against every instinct I had. The landslide had been cleared, the trails open again. But when I reached the ridge, the exposed coffins were gone. Nothing there but packed earth. A few broken boards lying nearby like scattered ribs. I looked for the one with the hand, couldn't find it. But in the hollow where it had been, the ground had sunk a little deeper. I stepped closer, crouched, and saw something buried just beneath the surface. I brushed it aside. It was the glove. Same one I'd seen in the man's tent. Laid perfectly flat, fingers pointing down. I didn't take it. I backed away and returned to the cabin. Inside, everything had been undisturbed except the far wall. A section of paneling had cracked, just slightly, revealing a cavity between boards. I pushed it open, found a space about the size of a small trunk. Empty, except for a scrap of cloth and what looked like the edge of a photograph. I pulled it out. It was another image of the grave, but this time it was taken from underground, looking up through slats of wood, a hand reaching, and in the upper corner of the frame, my face looking down. I dropped it and ran. I drove for hours, trying to lose the feeling crawling along my back. I stayed in a different town each night, but it didn't help. Every window started showing signs. First, just condensation, then handprints, then faint scratches in the glass like nails dragged lightly, patiently, and always in the morning. I'd find something weighting a stone by the bed, a scrap of wood on the floor, a nail laid gently on the pillow. Eventually, I stopped sleeping in houses. I moved between motels and roadside cabins. I got a burner phone. No name attached. Still, the photos kept coming. Sometimes mailed, sometimes left in the glove box of my car. Each one taken from inside something. Underground. Always looking up. Always toward me. One day, I got a package with no return address. Inside was a small, folded map of Haven's crest, hand-drawn. A red X marked the exact spot where we'd found the grave. Beneath it, one sentence he still hasn't let go. I don't know who he is. Maybe no one does. Maybe it's not about who it's about where. About being seen by the place. Remembered by it. I haven't returned since. But the hand hasn't stopped showing up. Sometimes in mirrors. Sometimes pressed into walls. Sometimes I wake to find my own hand resting against glass I didn't know was there. It doesn't move. But it's not mine. Fog had rolled in hard that morning, thick as wool and slow to lift. I was at my post by 6:00 a.m. sharp, like always. My name's Terry Elwood, 37, technician at a weather station perched just above Old Bethel Lot. A flat patch of gravel and frost that once served as a burial site before the county paved it into a forgotten pull-off. I monitor cloud cover, wind drift, pressure, nothing glamorous. Just quiet hours and screens. The fog didn't worry me, but the silence that came with it did. Usually the birds still called, even in thick weather. That morning, there was nothing. Just the low hum of power through the outpost walls and the steady, watching quiet. At 6:41, a red light blinked across the lot. Just once. Quick. Like a lens flare caught in the mist. I leaned against the glass, trying to trace the source, but saw nothing. Then the fog shifted slightly, and I saw it. A white cat sitting dead center in the lot. Perfect posture, fur clean as porcelain. Its eyes glowed faintly red, not from reflection, but from something else. Something beneath the surface. I stepped back instinctively. The cat didn't move, didn't twitch. It just stared, and the light flickered again. I radioed it in, half laughing at myself. Got a stray cat with devil eyes, I said. No answer. Static. I repeated the call. Nothing. I turned back to the window, and the cat was gone. Not walked off, just gone. I checked the camera feed from 10 minutes earlier. Nothing unusual. No light. No cat, just the empty lot and shifting fog. But when I paused the footage at 6:41, the screen flashed red for a split second. And then something else words burned into the corner of the frame. Look back. I froze. The footage looped. The words didn't reappear. I rewound it again. Frame by frame. Still nothing. Just that single frame, 6 red letters like embers burned into the feed. I checked the file metadata. Corrupted. The timestamp read 1901. I hadn't even noticed that at first. I closed the feed and turned on all the lights. Told myself it was an error, an artifact, something explainable. But when I walked to the door, I found something lying at the base, a tuft of white fur. Dry, still warm. I went home early that day, rattled. Told the crew I had a migraine. Drove slow. Fog followed me nearly the whole way, lingering even after I passed the last of the switchbacks. When I pulled into my driveway, I saw it again on the roof of my car. The same cat. White. Still. Eyes glowing just enough to catch the reflection of my porch light. It didn't blink. I stepped out, expecting it to dart. But it didn't flinch. I was 3 feet away when it finally jumped. Not down, but up straight over the ridge of the house and out of sight. Too high for any cat. Too fast for gravity. Inside. I tried to ignore it, tried to eat, to sleep. But at 2:13 a.m., I woke to my bedroom window lit red, not from outside, but from the inside. Letters had been smeared across the glass. Clear, dripping, written with something thick and dark. Look back. I sat in the hallway the rest of the night, lights on, door locked. In the morning, the message was gone. Not wiped gone, like it had never been written. But when I turned on the TV, the emergency broadcast test screen flickered for a second. And those same 2 words flashed across the bottom. I stopped going to work for a few days, reported equipment issues, blamed power surges, but I couldn't explain what came next. The cat returned every evening, first on the porch, then at the edge of my vision in mirrors, glass, even in reflections on my phone screen. Its eyes always red, never blinking. It didn't move like an animal. It moved like it was being pulled, like it existed in 2 places at once, and didn't care which one you saw. Then came the audio. The outpost called me back. My supervisor said a strange file had been logged from my station. No one could access it. They sent it to me. I played it once. Just static at first. Then a whisper, too low to catch. But when I slowed the track and filtered out the static, I heard a voice say my name. Terry. It rasped. Then a pause. Look back. Then a soft meow. Not from a cat, from a person trying to sound like one. I deleted the file. Or thought I did. The next morning, it was back on my desktop. Renamed simply Return, Wave. I didn't open it again. I didn't have to. At 3:00 a.m. that night, I heard the voice outside my window low, dry, and close enough to fog the glass. Terry. It said, look back. I stayed frozen in bed. Covers pulled up like a child pretending monsters obey the rules of fabric. When the sound finally stopped, the house felt colder, heavier, like something was still inside, waiting for me to flinch. I tried moving out, booked a motel an hour south, paid in cash, but the second night there, the front desk rang my room and said a white cat had wandered in. Odd eyes, the clerk said, red like taillights. I told her not to touch it. An hour later, it was outside my room, pawing softly at the door. No meow, just the scratch of nail against metal. I opened the curtains and saw it standing upright. Not tall, still cat-sized, but too balanced. Too human in the way its weight centered. It didn't look through the glass. It looked into it. The motel lost power that night. Entire building. When the emergency lights kicked on, I saw a figure standing just beyond the edge of the window's reflection, tall, wearing something loose like a coat or robe, with a white face that had no features. I turned away. When I looked back, it was gone. The cat was gone, but on the window, drawn in the condensation. Were the letters again, look back? I didn't sleep. At dawn, I left everything and drove to the outpost. It wasn't the same. The building was still there. But something in the air had changed. The wind no longer moved. The trees didn't sway. Inside, the monitors flickered with static and unreadable characters. Black screens showing looping footage of the gravel lot, always the same frame. The cat in the center, the red light behind it. The timestamp was blank, just an endless line of zeros. I powered everything down, pulled the main breaker, but as I stepped outside, The cat was there again, sitting on the hood of my truck. I reached for my phone to take a picture, but the screen lit up with a message before I touched it, already seen. The camera wouldn't open, just a looping flash of static, like it was trying to show me something older than the lens could interpret. I got in the truck, started the engine, and drove through the cat. It didn't move, didn't resist. I felt the tires pass through something not fur or bone, but like rolling through smoke. When I looked in the rearview mirror, it was still there, staring, blinking. Finally, just once. That night, the lights in my house flickered as soon as I crossed the threshold. Every screen turned itself on. My laptop, my phone, even the old TV in the back room I hadn't used in years. All showing the same thing, me. From behind, sitting in a chair I didn't recognize, with the cat curled in my lap. A red light pulsed behind us, like a warning or a countdown. I unplugged everything, but the images burned in my eyes long after. My reflection started lagging in mirrors always 2 seconds slower, like it was thinking before I was. I found the final message 3 days ago. Not digital, not a whisper, carved into the siding of my house. Deep and deliberate. You looked. I hadn't meant to. I'd done everything to avoid it. But something had shifted. I started dreaming of a place underground, circular, hollow, smooth walls marked with handprints. The cat waits at the center, its eyes now black, unblinking, as I kneel in front of it. And always the red light pulses behind me, growing brighter, closer. Last night I came home to find the door ajar. The lights were off, the air still. On the kitchen table sat a small box. Inside, a single bell, old, rusted, still faintly warm. The cat sat on the counter beside it, silent, tail curling around its feet. Its eyes flickered red once, then dimmed to black. It jumped down and walked into the hallway, toward the room with no mirrors. I followed. I don't remember choosing to. I just did. I haven't left since. Haven't opened the curtains. The light in here pulses sometimes, from somewhere I can't locate. At night, I feel something pressing against the glass. Not looking in, looking out. I think maybe that's what it wanted all along. Not to be seen, but to see. Through me, into wherever I go next. And whatever waits beyond that red light. I don't think it ever blinks.